maybe in like 5 minutes we'll do another just check on a longer clip, but at least for now we should be safe.
Okay.
Dude, so cool thing today was just simply the fact that I ran into like 2 of the guys from this Discord in a tournament was wild to me. But it made me realize like you've been saying is like fresh. It definitely needs a fresh primer and just general update given how many cool cards we've gotten recently. So I don't know where you want to start or what we'd like to do, but I'm up for anything. Let me see if I can pop this out to full screen. Cool.
Sure.
What are you thinking?
So do you want to just kind of go through the primer line by line?
That's exactly. Like, let's just do the 101 in like 5 minutes. Like, let's just read the text explaining how it goes and go.
Yeah. So best thing to start with when any kind of deck tech is just kind of reading by starting with reading the commander. It's not always super important for like pile decks, 4 or 5 color piles, because commander's not usually as relevant, but this is a very synergistic deck. So let's read the commander. Alaundo the Seer is 2 and blue and green, so 4 mana for a 3/5 human shaman. The very wordy way of accumulating value over time on a tap ability. It is draw a card, then exile a card from your hand and put a number of time counters on it equal to its mana value. It gains when the last time counter is removed from this card. If it's exiled, you may cast it without paying its mana cost. If you cast a creature spell this way, it gains haste until end of turn. Then remove a time counter from each other card you own in exile.
Right, so nearly suspend, but not actually suspend. With the 2 big differences being these cards do not get a time counter removed during your upkeep, and the haste that is enabled by them is only until the end of turn.
That's true.
I think that's really
both very, very important rulings. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then the bigger thing too is to always remember that the card itself, the one you've decided to exile that you've selected, it is the card that is actually gaining this when text. So when that trigger occurs, the trigger is actually coming from the card that's in exile, not from Alaundo being resolved through the tab ability itself.
Yes, that is also very important.
And then I think the other part of that too is that then when you have multiple cards that are coming off at the same time, when they're having 2 cards with the last time counter being removed, because those are your triggers, you get to decide in what order those go on the stack, but they're not forcing you yet to decide whether you're casting them or not. They are just this trigger, the when trigger that Alaundo gives them. And so that means they can actually sit on the stack uncast, waiting for you to decide, for many, many game actions, essentially, like just sort of sitting there. And you have to become sort of master of the stack, essentially, to understand like where things are going to get stuck. You might accidentally yourself even stick them there yourself and not realize you've done it by accident. And a lot of that has to do with the sort of intruder alarm lines and things like that. But yeah, okay. So that's the complications of Alaundo, or the basics of the ability.
Yeah, so being able to recognize and order the stack and being able to manipulate it in a competent way is going to be very key to playing the deck in a successful way.
Yep. Yeah. So I guess we could go through the primer, or would you like to go back to some of this just staples?
Yeah, let's kind of go through the primer, since we're kind of doing an actual deck tech for this. At least sort of an updated version. The biggest question is, why would you play this deck over some other other kind of mid-range tempo-y type deck?
Yeah.
The biggest draws that I have to Alaundo are you get the flexibility to both grind and storm in a way that is not only difficult to interact with because it's primarily creature activation based, but also can be at instant speed. So part of the resolution of the ability is removing the last time counter. When the last time counter is removed, that's when you attempt to, resolve that ability and put the spell on the stack. Meaning you get to completely ignore timing restrictions on cards you put into exile with the ability.
Yeah, and I think what I've seen in the like kind of competitive environment is that when you're on that spectrum, on one end of it, you could simply be telling the table, no, I'm just digging, right? Just with every Alaundo activation, I'm looking for the next piece to help save the table. But at the same time, I'm getting so much value out of every single one of those taps potentially that on the other end of it, I could be completely storming off and they don't even realize it. And it's fascinating to see how it sort of ebbs and flows, and it has a lot to do with your own decisions of what you exile and how many taps you've got left. But yeah, I think that flexibility makes it dangerous enough that you can take on the regular meta from a really cool angle that it's not the most powerful, but it definitely can get you some wins. And we are getting better tools regularly. It feels like, I know everybody is obviously, but like feels to me like in the last 6 months, Alaundo has gotten, I'd say, significantly better. And it's probably things like surveillance camera with Echo, Go. We'll have to go through the new stuff later. But okay, cool. Cons.
Cons. You fold immediately to a curse totem.
Yeah.
That is the number one hate piece. If you want to hate on this deck, a resolved curse totem does completely shut you out of the game. There's we play removal spells for it, but like there's only so much you can play around that card because we play 30 plus creatures and almost every single one has an activated ability of some sort.
Yep. And it's also being drawn out by things like Thrasios and Kinnan in our same exact colors. Like people are playing this against our colors no matter what, and we just have to deal with Curse Totem and Drannith. You come across it on a regular basis, and Orcish. Like best you can hope for is you have something like a Legolas Quick Reflexes to maybe pop the creatures, or you're doing your Retraction Helix, Banishing Knack type removal. But yeah, these are tough, and they're things you have to be super ready for. To the point where with Curse Totem, there's things like Emerald Charm and Force of Vigor, which kind of comes in and out of the deck, right, depending on what's going on in the meta. But yeah, it's definitely, you got to watch out for it because it'll shut you out. At the same time, I'll just say on the back end of that is that if you have an out, the nice thing about Alaundo is that you're not necessarily casting those cards yet, and so they can go on the stack as the triggers. You can put you've already done a bunch of digging, you've actually got a bunch of value going, and all of a sudden now that stacks piece, you get to remove it because you knew you could. And so sometimes you can stop your opponents, from kind of messing with you until you're ready, if you play it right too. So it can kind of be helpful at times depending.
Yeah, there's Drannith and Dorkish Bowmasters are both definitely a pain. 30, like I said, 30 plus creatures. Many of them are, 1 toughness. All of our mana dorks. We got Wirewood, Symbiote, Quirion Ranger, Fairy Mastermind, a whole slew of creatures that die immediately to Orcish Bowmasters.
One of the greatest pros of Alaundo is his big booty. This 3/5, he is almost never the target for anything, which is really cool. Although I did, they'll die to a gut shot or whatever once in a while. We'll see. Yeah. All right, cons, how to play. Okay, how to play. This is kind of where we have to. Well, not how to play. So let me before we go. It's like when it comes to how to play Alaundo, there's how to play, sure, and then I think there's we're down to maybe 3 to 4 different versions or packages or avenues you go. So we'll ignore that for a moment.
How to play. So I think of Alaundo as, about as pure as it gets of a CDH version of a tempo deck. How, standard decks, the best analogy I can provide is, standard mono blue flying, flyers, tempo, kind of being able to generate that timing and forcing your opponents to deal with each other a little bit because you always have the option.
Right.
Excuse me, of winning at instant speed. And even not even just necessarily winning, but being able to continue developing at instant speed on someone else's end step or in response to a win or something like that.
Yep.
Like I said, it's a tempo deck at heart. The hardest part is always going to be, getting your feet underneath you, as I like to call it, which is, getting that first and second untapper. Once you kind of reach a second untapper every turn, it's very easy to just start chaining them into the next one, into the next one, into the next one, and then untapping all of them, or digging until we have a density of combo pieces that by the time you reach your fifth, sixth activation, you've probably found some sort of avenue to win.
Right. And then I think there's probably the 2 or 3 different going back to play styles, but tempo too is like, I think when we look at different deck lists, you can do something that is, we'll call it Alaundo Turbo, which is not very fast, obviously, but if you commit to let's say a turn 2 Alaundo as you're mulling for that, and building the deck in a way where you're pushing on turn 3 potentially with that first Alaundo activation, but you're very glass cannony and it may not work out for you. That's, there's that. And then there's, something that's not all the way on the Ristic slop meta, but, getting closer to it of almost just a normal Simic deck, right? You're going to have a good amount of interaction and you're going to set up maybe a draw engine early because those are your untappers, and you don't need a Londo until turn 4 because now you've got Shang-Chi or 1,000-Year Elixir or Marvin, and you get to decide sort of which path works in your meta, and that's I think where you start to get nuances between the different versions of these decks now.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and another part of it comes down as to, we have options in terms of Chakram Retriever, Unctus. Both of those kinds of cards lead you down a path that is still winning at instant speed a lot of the times, but instant speed on your own turn, especially in the case of Chakram Retriever, which that 5-drop slot really kind of dictates how you want to build the rest of your deck.
That's exactly.
If you're on Chakram Retriever, you tend to be, play on your own turn, but still win an instant speed. A lot of the other option ends up being Seedborn Muse and being able to, ends up being a more Alaundo-centric game plan, but also tends to have, a lot more inevitability and consistency, whereas the Chakram Retriever plan is more about explosiveness and being able to build a board state from otherwise not having one.
Yep. That's a great way to characterize it. Is like there's the fork in the road is Seedborn versus Chakram. Not that you couldn't have both, but usually it will characterize the deck pretty quickly.
Yeah.
All right.
I don't recommend both.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Because I really don't recommend both. One of the things that building this deck, it took me a long time to figure out is because we're putting counters on it equal to its mana value as part of our activation, you really do want the average CMC of your list to be as low as you can get it, realistically. There are, big chunker options that are very powerful. Like I said, Seedborn Muse, Chakram Retriever, Tolarian Kraken is the one that was a fun one when I was first starting out, but it's a 6-drop. And it's just so expensive. Like I said, I see a lot of lists all the time about, Alaundo decks playing big chunky spells and like thinking you're really realistically going to activate 7 times and just being able to cast, a Tidespout Tyrant or something, big crazy Cynic thing.
Yeah.
Which is how a lot of casual players build the deck. It's really an opposite philosophy when you're taking this deck to a CEDH table.
Yeah, there's a better chance you hardcast the Hullbreaker Horror from your hand by untapping a Mana Vault twice instead. Like, it's much more likely that you can hardcast something like that. It's weird too because as you start to do what I call Alaundo math, right? About how many untaps do you have left in your hand and how many untaps you're going to need to get to the next one, and the things that are in exile. There's so much more strategy that goes into that eventually, because I think when you start out casual, right, you're just doing whatever you exiling whatever you want to. Now you got to start exiling the things that are like for politics purposes. You exile the One Ring to show them that in 4 activations you're going to have 1 protection, and they're going to hold up something for that. Well, cool, you got something for that, because I don't care about that thing. I'm putting that out there as a red herring. I'm going to cast my Intruder Alarm after you guys counter that thing. Like, so yeah, it's a fun opportunity to talk about, to figure out what you want to show your opponents, what you don't. Yeah, it's a fun. It's frustrating, Either there'll be more than one opportunity where you're going to miscalculate, but you get better and
Yeah.
better with it as time goes on.
And manipulating the informations that your opponents actually receive and being able to safeguard the information that's in your hand is a very important aspect to being able to take this deck and being able to excel at it and win games consistently.
Yeah.
You can a lot with similar to how a lot of other decks function. You can point to a Sisay deck. Oh, they've got five one of each color. They can activate Sisay and find whatever they want. You represent the same kind of theoretical information sharing when you're exiling these cards face up. But what your opponents don't see is the Legolas's quick reflexes in your hand, or the dramatic reversal in your hand, that really changes the math on their expectations for when these kinds of spells are going to come down.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Okay, combos and win cons. Let's do it. Intruder Alarm, baby. That's the number one. Like it is what it is.
And Intruder Alarm is my bread and butter. It is the most consistent. Like if Intruder Alarm resolves, it is my most consistent and most difficult for people to stop win condition in this deck, and it's not close.
Agree. Yeah. Earlier today, I had, it was a land into Soul Ring, turn 2 Alaundo, turn 3 Intruder Alarm, and it was over. It just was. It just it wasn't even. I barely had it, but I had a crop rotation into Forbidden Orchard. Again, I'm going through the line right now, but like you get it. It's that easy sometimes to just have it go on turn 3. It just is. Now, we have no way of really searching for it unless you want to play Intuition, Gifts Ungiven, Drift of Phantasms, which I think you and I both don't really play any of those anymore. I think you were on Intuition longer maybe than I was, but we both dropped it by now.
Yeah, I'm not on Intuition or or Gifts Ungiven at this point. It was both of those cards work very well in theory, but a lot of the times I have just keep finding myself without enough mana to make 4 mana for a gifts pile plus whatever you actually need to complete the rest of your gifts pile,
right?
In order to get the whole combo into play and have it actually function.
Yeah.
And another part of it is building this deck. It's very important that you be realistic about how slow the deck actually is or can be in some certain circumstances. So building the deck in a way where you're not building it with a lot of dead cards. So every card in the deck, I'm fine just exiling it. Except for, a couple of X spells and, some counter spells. You know what I mean?
Yeah, right.
Every other card in this deck, you just churn it. Just get it out of your hand. Just get through it.
Right.
Like I said, being able to just not care about what actually goes into exile, if you don't have that luxury, is pretty powerful.
Yeah. So things with Intruder Alarm, just for the Alaundo players, one is don't forget it's actually a stacks piece. It has a first piece of text that says like creatures don't untap during their controller's untap steps. I've had judges call me out for not, it's weird. It's not really my responsibility, but it is. And then obviously whenever creature enters, untap all creatures. Now, the one thing to remember, especially if you're casting a creature off of Alaundo, is it has haste. So when it enters, there's going to be an Intruder Alarm trigger, and then you can actually activate the ability of that creature. So if it's another untapper, you can do one more Alaundo activation now, at least before the Intruder Alarm actually even goes off. Other than that, you want to go get Forbidden Orchard because it creates a 1/1 spirit, and as long as you have a permanent untapper, so Kiora's Follower, basically just not a Feto, not Seeker, and then any of the other ones beyond that, you can untap the land as part of the Intruder Alarm trigger, and just you're good to go after that. And you're just getting more value than everybody else. You're going to get 4 or 5 Alaundo activations to everybody else's 1 untap. So even if you are up against someone, maybe Rog Thras, there's really not a lot of people that untap better than us. Even if they do try to do their activations, we can still usually activate like on top of them. And I think part of that too is also remembering to sequence your innocuous moves first. So something like, okay, you just finished the Intruder Alarm trigger. The first thing you should do is untap that Forbidden Orchard. right? Because they're not going to stop you from doing that. That's not the action that they realize that they can't stop it. But now, as you go to do your next Alaundo activation, cool, I still have my Forbidden Orchard to do another intruder alarm on top of this one. So figuring, keeping those back, keeping them safe, and also always kind of prioritize. For me at least, I don't know about your play style, but getting the safer actions out of the way that still give me value, I found to be super helpful as far as like keeping the table from overreacting.
Yeah, like I said, that's another part of intruder alarm. It's so difficult for your opponents to interact with once it's resolved. Force of vigor, like you most of the time you can bury that spell underneath a new intruder alarm activation and again and again and again, to where it just never resolves. So, like I said, by the time intruder resolves, most of the time your opponent's interaction just doesn't matter anymore.
Exactly.
Especially if you sequence your spells and activations carefully. Once you get to having that second or third untapper come down, or have a sufficient number of intruder alarm triggers to resolve already, usually what I will do is I'll leave an extra untapper just untapped,
Always.
just in case I need to win again over top.
Absolutely.
Of opponent's interaction. Yeah.
No, it's the best move for sure. Even keeping back, it's you get used to holding back the mass untappers too. Vitalize. There's nothing wrong with Vitalize staying in your hand for as long as possible and just keep it there, hang out. Oh, look at that! I've got a Kitsa all of a sudden. It's just happens. It happens more often than you think. So, you hold on to them a little bit longer. All right, moving on to the Freed and Pemmons packages. Let's do it.
Yep. Freed from the Real and Pemmons Aura are very similar cards for people who don't necessarily know what those cards are. Freed from the Real is 2 and a blue for an enchantment aura that says blue untap enchanted creature, or blue, I believe, tap enchanted creature. The second line doesn't usually matter. We're not tapping down a creature 99% of the time. What we really care about is that pay 1 blue untap enchanted creature. There are some people, like myself, I am not currently playing that magic card in my list. It is one of the combos that I'm opting out of in my current list. I have found that it does, tell your opponents, hey, here is the time to interact with me, before the enchantment resolves.
Yeah, and I think that's a realization that we're kind of coming to with the deck in general. Is these are extremely powerful. Two things. One, we don't make double blue as easily as some decks, as Kinnan or others. We could focus on it more if we wanted to, but it actually detracts kind of from the deck in general. Casting these, because they're so obvious, they will attract counters. Now, I think still at this point there's a spectrum where you have to decide how many of these kinds of very dangerous win con type or near win con type cards you're going to pack into the deck, because it can be good and bad. Is like one, it makes it so you have you can just draw out all the counters, all the interaction you want to. And at the same time, by being too dense and not picking one plan, you're not focusing enough, and you're going to get stuck where you've got this, Pemmons that you can't cast. You don't have 3 Alaundo activations, and it feels really bad in your hand. And so it's super easy to win in the same way that Intruder Alarm. If it resolves, you're usually at that point you're off the races and you're good. But yeah, it's definitely hitting a weird point where it's also what I've found is that if you exile it and your the other players see it, they get scared, even if it's on 3 still. They don't care. They're still gonna hate you down. So yeah, it's there. It's real. It's effective. I still play. Today I played both. I think tomorrow I'll probably just play Freed. And then there's a couple of like I don't want to, they're just runners up or worthy mentions of, like, I think that Aura of Dominion, the 2 blue and then pay 1 tap an untap creature to untap this creature, has some legs in some version of this deck somewhere down the road. and maybe even that Ringmaster one we looked at the other day with the 5 to untap. But anyway, moving on. We can go on to Marvin and Yorth.
Well, I just want to talk about them just a little bit more there.
Sure.
For one of the things that I've very specifically done with my list is all of my combos, once they're assembled, they no longer require a mana investment. So Chalcom Retreater, Intruder Alarm, Irith plus Marvin,
understood.
Unctus, all of that kind of stuff. Once they're in play and resolved, they no longer require a continued mana investment. So anything you storm off with or chain into beyond that ends up being, if you just don't have enough mana to continue going, for whatever reason, if you do resolve it and freed from the Reeler Penance Aura, if you just there are sometimes when you won't get there. You just don't have enough blue mana to keep the chain going.
Yeah.
And like I said, that's one of the big things that I've found after removing them from the list that I've actually much preferred.
That makes a lot of sense. You're right. You have to basically cast this, knowing you've got a budget left of however many blue. And honestly, there's actually other things I'd rather be doing with that blue in this deck. So unless you're right, unless I've already got the infinite, then that makes sense. I like the philosophy too. That actually is super helpful because especially with Unctus, right, which we can go through. I think it's down there below, but you're saying, okay, you cast the Thassus, you get the ETB. You don't have to spend any mana on anything now. You're just doing Seeker of Skybreak or a Fetto Alchemist infinitely until you're good on the ETB.
And even before that, so being able to loot through your deck until you find a Thassa's Oracle, whatever extra cards you have in your hand, you can find a Lotus Petal or a Crop Rotation or something like that, or a Utopia Sprawl to help you fix your colors to help cast the double blue.
Right.
And that's actually one of the things I'm pretty excited about the new Rewrite History, which is kind of a similar combo line to Unctus. Effectively, letting you both. Because we should probably explain what each of these cards does. But the gist of it is they let you draw and discard a card anytime one of your creatures becomes tapped. In Unctus's case, it's specifically blue creatures, but he has an activated ability which is able to turn some of your creatures blue, so you'll be able to turn Seeker of Skybreak into a blue creature, which then will trigger Unctus. And Rewrite History, it has a sacrifice text. If you can respond on top of that sacrifice text with more untaps and draw discards, I actually foresee it end up being better in a lot of ways to Unctus because you can draw and discard through your library, find your Thassa's Oracle, and then let the Rewrite History sacrifice text resolve and pick up 2 counterspells, Pact of Negation or Force of Will or something like that. Fierce Guardianship, if you've got your commander in play, Force of Will, whatever, you'll be able to then protect your Thassa's Oracle, combo, and then finish the game that way.
So the idea here is like 2 in a blue, although I think Unctus is 1 blue.
Unctus is 1 blue, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So our 3 mana here. Now, with regards to the 4th plan counter, we're basically going to respond to this trigger because we have infinite taps and untaps. So we're never going to lose this enchantment, but we have to do it all right now, essentially. So if for whatever reason it failed, we would lose this eventually at that point. But whenever one or more creatures you control become tapped, draw a card, then discard a card, put a plan counter on this enchantment. So it's basically exactly what Unctus does, where Unctus actually, first you have to make sure the creature is blue and an artifact, which it can do for you by paying 2 life or 1 blue, right? And then we go through like this. So have you had many games with this yet, or is this still in the design phase?
It's still in the design phase for me. I've stopped into 2 different LGSs and haven't been able to find a copy of an uncommon, which seems crazy to me, but kind of is what it is at this point. Like I said, I need to get my hands on a copy before I can really give a guarantee as to whether or not I like it more than some of our other combo options, but I have high hopes. For sure.
So the thing for me, and I want to get back in the primer in a second, but the thing with me with Unctus is when I see it in my hand at the wrong time of the game, I hate it, and it makes it so I want to take it out of the deck. How do you get around that? Now, to me, Rewrite History actually sounds way better because but it's the same effect, which is weird, I think Unctus makes me I'm afraid. I'm scared that I'm gonna have to, I'm gonna craft my hand and make bad decisions about what I'm about to put in my graveyard. Have you designed the deck to always be able to get that stuff back? Is that what keeps you from caring about that, or should we treat the graveyard like it's our hand still, or I don't know. I'm always scared about the whole rummage aspect.
The rummage aspect definitely takes some practice, and it takes kind of some know-how about, it's kind of a seesaw about how much mana you have available to you, um, after your combo versus how many cards you have in hand. So if you have, a whole bunch of mana, but two cards or two or three cards in hand, it's actually pretty easy to finish the combo, because even if you only have green mana, you basically loot until you find Finale of Devastation and then reanimate the Thassa's Oracle instead of casting it for double blue. Um, and then on the flip side of that, what you end up doing is, if you don't have a lot of mana but you do have a lot of cards, you can draw a discard until you can find a way to produce your mana. So Lotus Petal, Elvish Spirit Guide, crop rotation for a Gaia's Cradle, something like that.
Right.
That will end up being able to convert that into not only the colors but the cards that you need in order to execute and get a Thassa's Oracle trigger onto the stack.
Nice.
It definitely took a lot of practice and fiddling with the deck to try and get it to that place, but Fate Stitcher helps with cradle count. Sometimes if you have a glut of cards in hand, what you can actually do is you can still go ahead and discard a Thassa's Oracle if you don't have enough mana, but you have a whole bunch of cards. You can endurance your graveyard back into your library, and go again effectively with you're drawing and discarding, but this time with a fresh batch of cards in your library to then loot through and find exactly what you need if you, for whatever reason, used your Lotus Petal earlier in the game or something like that.
Right. Okay, and then I don't think we got into Yorith and Marvin. Was that all you wanted to do on Freed? Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, that's all I really had to say about Freed and Unctus Steven.
And then we're on to Yorith and the legendaries, essentially. Yorith can untap 2 legendary creatures. So if we can get, not hasty, but just a not summoning sick Alaundo, Marvin, and Yorith, then we use Yorith to untap Marvin and Alaundo. We can activate Alaundo and then use the Marvin to activate it as a copy, essentially, of Yorith, or having the ability of Yorith to untap Alaundo and Yorith, and we go back and forth forever, doing whatever we like. And then we've got some other legendaries like in the deck that can kind of play into this. We don't really tend to do it with anything that's like a legendary mana dork. Like, we're not doing Selvala stuff or anything like that.
No.
But you could do something with Kitsa. We now have Shang-Chi, so you could technically generate mana for paying for things like the 2 for Kitsa. That's one of the better uses there. Formidable Speaker costs 1 to activate as well.
Fairy Mastermind, even if you're doing Shang-Chi. If you have Marvin, Irith, Fairy Mastermind, and Shang-Chi, you can use Shang-Chi to activate and generate infinite mana for abilities, and then dump that mana into Fairy Mastermind and start drawing, not only drawing your deck but also drawing your opponent's deck. So you have to be careful with that one, obviously, but it can lead you to a winning position, basically. And the only other card I was going to talk about with Irith is Echo, the newest edition, or one of the newest editions, which is Echo Perceptive Prodigy, which is 2 and a blue for a 1/4 human hero. Legendary, has Vigilance, and then for 1 mana and tap it, copy target activated or triggered ability you control from a creature source. You may choose your targets for the copy. And basically, with Echo, Irith, and Alaundo in play, you can effectively play 1 generic mana for an Alaundo activation, which, in my opinion, is a better rate than Freed from the Real or Pennenzora. But they also don't quite go infinite in the same way. But if you have enough mana, you can assemble one of your other combos using all of that mana.
Yeah, and we were saying there's a lot of other really sneaky things you can do with Echo, just because creature source means so many different things.
Mm-hmm.
So we were talking about transmute. If you did the Drift of Phantasms transmute, technically you could copy it. Spell Seeker ETB. I've the fastest Oracle ETB. Technically, if it gets buried on the stack, you can go and copy it and bring it back. Bring a copy to the top of the stack if you have to.
Yep.
Lots of things like that you can play around with depending on what other stuff you're running. It's very interesting. And
Double Volatile Storm Drake. That one's a hot one.
I like that. Okay, that one. I
You
think
give it and then give it again.
there's some math eventually where I think you can copy. Oh no, I think of Go-Go. Go-Go is XX, right? And if you have enough mana, you can eventually copy enough untaps to go infinite. But it's a lot. It is not an easy thing, and you have to decide.
Mm-hmm.
Go-Go is much more of an investment, but it copies basically all triggered and activated abilities regardless of the source, and that's what makes it a little bit more flexible, but definitely not. It's not going to make the list these days. It's you have to either lean really heavy into it or just be out.
Yeah.
Um,
I say talking about Echo, we've got another combo that I've kind of worked into the deck with it as well, which is Copperhorn Scout. I've been pretty impressed with this card actually.
Such good.
I was not on it for a long time. I didn't think a 1-mana 1/1 was going to end up being worth it, but when you combine it with Wirewood Symbiote as well as Echo, which can copy the triggered ability because it's from a creature source. As long as you have Alaundo out and can produce one generic mana from your creatures, you can then just go infinite with Copperhorn Scout trigger plus Echo.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, there's been more than one time where I'll make a copy of it using Flesh Duplicate or Mockingbird, even better, right? It's 1. So, because the Mockingbird has to be 1 because you can't pay the X. But making a copy of this, cool. Now I've got 2 of these triggers on top of each other, and that's usually enough. I mean, you're going to have at least 4, 5, 6 Alaundo activations at that point. Like, that should get you pretty far. Now, my favorite thing is the fact that that's going to be in the middle of combat, but that's the best part about Alaundo's timing is it doesn't care. It's whatever you want. So yeah, Copperhorn. What else about copy? Copperhorn goes with the Wirewood, which is nice. And then remembering too that if you've got Marvin out, you can activate Marvin's version of the Wirewood and the Quirion Ranger triggers there as well. And then
being able to double up on that is very nice.
Yeah. One more 3-drop would be Irma from the Ninja Turtles series. Turns in, she's legendary, 2 in a blue. I've been using her. It's not working out, but it was another piece that made the Yorith legendary thing work.
It was. There are a number of options that you can do to go harder on Irith.
Yeah.
I have found that it's just not up my alley. Trying to go that deep on on Irith. I find that I only really go for Irith combos if it's convenient and I've stumbled my way into already having the combo pieces in play or something. I don't usually go out of my way to tutor for it. But the good news about the combo is Irith and Marvin are both incredibly good in the deck already. Irith's just an untapper, Marvin's another untapper.
Staples no matter what. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Then there was a section on Gifts Ungiven and Intuition, which we kind of talked about. We've sort of dropped off on. Auroral Procession has also stopped making the list more recently. I think it was we usually had Eternal Witness and Noxious Revival and Auroral Procession, and it helped to do some cycling of the deck whenever you got to the point of having to draw people out. I'm trying to remember if there was anything else that was special about it.
Yeah, Auroral Procession was primarily in the deck in order to make Intuition and Gifts Ungiven piles work.
Yeah.
That's primarily what I used it for, and once I fell off of both of those cards, Auroral Procession kind of made logical sense to go along with it. Being able to have an instant speed regrowth is pretty powerful, but like I said, it's not nearly as flexible as an Eternal Witness, or it's just as flexible as Eternal Witness, but not as breakable as Eternal Witness. For example, with Echo, which you can do with Eternal Witness and a mass untap spell, meaning Vitalize, Dramatic Reversal, or Benefactor's Draft, you can Eternal Witness, target a card in your graveyard, activate Echo to copy the Eternal Witness ETB, picking up a mass untap spell, cast the masked untap spell, which untaps the Echo, which then lets you, recopy the Eternal Witness ETB, which lets you, pick up the mass untap spell and you cycle it back through again that way.
Ooh, okay. So it's a sort of assemble your own kits, assemble your own ISO-Rev.
Mm-hmm.
I like that. Okay.
Yeah, because it works just as well at instant speed as a lot of your other combos. Like I said, Kits is one that I'm not currently playing myself. It's it's similar enough to Isochron Scepter, but also not quite. I've just found it to be more awkward than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah,
it's a card that's much better when you can accumulate a bunch of cards in hand and trigger that prowess a couple of times and then follow it up with a mass untap spell. But I don't accumulate cards in hand the same way a lot of other versions of this deck does.
Yeah, I mean, I'll find that I end the game sometimes with 2 lands and 2 to 3 cards in hand. Like I don't know, it's probably the way mine's built now, but I don't have. I don't draw nearly as many cards as other people at the table. In general, it feels like it's very narrow. Not to say there couldn't be a version where you pack it with engines, but the version I have right now is very tight. Everything's an untap or a tap, and you just hope at that point. Can we go back on Unctus for a second and just talk about Fate Stitcher synergy on that, and just whether or not or how often Fate Stitcher plays into your sculpting as you go down on Unctus?
Yeah. Unctus is very good at being able to convert 1 blue mana into a Cradle untap is usually what ends up happening with that.
So Unearth,
so
1 blue at sorcery speed, return it from the graveyard, gains haste, and now it's a may tap or untap target permanent. So you untap your guy's Cradle, and now you're off to whatever you've got in your hand, probably a tutor, I imagine.
Yeah, like I said, it's usually Finale of Devastation for me. Being able to not care. So being able to say, oh, I don't have enough blue mana. I'm going to go ahead and instead, crop rotate for a Gaia's Cradle, keep going through my loop, my draw discard loop until I find Finale. Still pitching the Thassa's Oracle, not caring. Being able to, at least with Unctus, you have at minimum 2 creatures in play. When you bring back Fate Stitcher, it becomes 3, which means 6 mana off of Gaia's Cradle. If you can, spend 1 blue mana and 1 green mana for a crop rotation, being able to convert 1 green, 1 blue into effectively 6 green, is a very easy way to convert, the colors of mana into something that's, more useful, which is Finale of Devastation for X2.
Yep. That's cool. Okay. So back to the primer. I think that was getting down sort of to we were done with win cons.
We can talk a little more about win cons beyond Thassa's Oracle. We've got a couple of different ways. The actual win con of the deck varies a lot from list to list. I think for people who are not playing Unctus or the new enchantment rewrite history, I think if you're not playing either of those, I don't think you should be playing Thassa's Oracle, and you should then elect to find a different way to win the game.
Yep.
But if you are playing both of those, I do think Thassa's Oracle is necessary. Like I said, that's one of the things that I've done with my list is make it less Alaundo dependent. So being able to put an Unctus into play or a rewrite history into play and being able to win with completely ignoring Alaundo, saying like for example you get stuck behind a Drannith Magistrate or something like that. Being able to say, all right, Alaundo's not happening this game, let's completely pivot, and having that pivot option is pretty powerful in my opinion.
I mean, it's great. I mean, the times I've done, Seeker on 1, right? Seeker Skybreak on 1 or Fetto on 1. Now, Unctus on 2 is actually a little dangerous at that point. So you take a turn, whatever, to set up and protect yourself, but then you're ready to go. Like it can be very powerful. It can sometimes even feel a little linear if you're, if you let it, take over in that sense. But yeah. So then, yeah, I guess to me, I guess number 2 to Thoracle in the case of like not needing it, we've almost always talked about Fairy Mastermind, Green Sun Zenith, Loops. Would you say that that's still number 2, or what would you go with next?
Number 2, the making the assumption that you're trying to win at instant speed, it usually involves Fairy Mastermind in some capacity. We've tried, endurance loops of various kinds. So being able to use retraction helix tends to be pretty key for those, or rapid hybridization in response to its, shuffle trigger. So being able to, loop through your library and then having a spell in your deck that lets you, take advantage of being able to cast the same spell over and over again. So, I've tried a whole bunch of different ones. Each one kind of has its own pros and cons. Like I said, being able to, cast a, let's find a good example. A gift a card spell, such as Peerless Recycling. Being able to force your opponents to draw an extra card every time you go through this loop. Being able to force your opponents to draw from an empty library. That one's an option. Winds of Rebuke to mill your opponents out. Reality Shift to exile their libraries. I think that one's probably my favorite because we have Forbidden Orchard in the mana base, and you can give your opponent a creature to exile and then start manifesting from their library. I've tried Blue Sun Zenith. That one was a fun one for a little bit. Just when I was focusing more on creating infinite mana, being able to just say, all right, X is 1,000, you're dead. Draw it again. X is 1,000, you're dead. Doing it that way.
Yep.
Artifacts that we've tried. I've tried
Cephalid Coliseum loops.
Cephalid Coliseum loops. I've tried Codex Shredder. Codex Shredder was a fun little one for a little bit. Like I said, just being able to loop a spell or tap and untap a permanent over and over again. I've got a number of them listed down below in my considering board. I'm not playing any of them right now because I am on the Thassa's Oracle, but deciding how you want to win a game is something to consider. Because not all of them can win through One Ring Protection or, can win through an Angel's Grace or something like that.
Right. Just depends on the scenario.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Let's call that the primary review, and I'll stop the recording just to check on the quality of it, and then we can keep going after that.
Yeah, that's good.
Let me see.